I've been debating on whether or not I should post anything here, but I figured I might as well. I'm a really big fan of this page, so I thought maybe I could contribute somehow. So here goes. Okay, so this one happened when I was probably 4 or 5 years old. We live in a tiny town in North Carolina. Combined with the city and entire county, we have a roughly 5,000 person population. Now, when I used to live with my parents before I married, we lived 10 minutes from town. Our neighbors are family, and they live about an acre away in each direction. We know everyone, and everyone knows us. When I was young, I had a particular fear of leaving my curtains up at night. I had to have my windows covered before I could sleep. I was too young to verbalize it at the time, but the concept of waking up with someone looking through my window terrified me. After this incident, this particular fear of mine had amplified. Anyways, to get to the actual story, we live pretty much by ourselves. If anyone comes onto our property, we know who they are. So, when my father and older brother started finding boot prints that didn't belong to them, we got a little nervous. Living out as far as we did meant police, fire department, or EMS would take much longer in a bad situation. My father had taught my older brother, sister, and me how to handle guns, even from an early age. At 6, I was very proficient with my Daisy BB gun. So, over the course of several days, they started to notice more boot tracks. Stuff was being moved around in the barn. The building door was open one morning, though we couldn't tell if anything was missing or not. It was apparent that someone was snooping around at night. Since I was so young, my parents didn't want to frighten me, but my brother did. He told me that someone was creeping around the yard at night, and one day, I would wake up and he'd be in the house. To put it lightly, my brother was an asshole. My brother always made fun of the fact that I would not sleep with my windows uncovered. He told me I needed to face my fears, and eventually, during this time that someone was definitely sneaking around, he convinced me to sleep with my curtains drawn back. I craved his approval more than anything, so I agreed to do so. He said now was the best time to do it, and I believed him. So, that night, I left my curtains drawn. It took a long time for me to get some sleep, but eventually it did come. I was always a very light sleeper, and even the slightest gust of wind would wake me. I would always wake up 4 or 5 times a night. That night, I heard the porch just outside my window creaking. I tried to ignore it, thinking that it had been my imagination. Then a shadow passed over the light coming from the lamp outside. I opened my eyes and sat up. A man was standing in the window, hands cupped up to the glass. In the process of running out of my room, I did piss myself. I ran straight for my parents' bedroom. At the same time, the doorknob to the front door started jiggling hard. He was trying to get in. I managed to get into the bedroom and tell my parents what had happened. My dad grabbed a gun and flashlight and headed outside, throwing the door open. Mom locked it behind him before waking up my brother. After nearly half an hour, my father came back in. His face was sweaty and pale. He sent my brother and I to bed, but we both sat up and listened. My father had found a tarp and blankets set up about a half a mile into the woods, just off the logging trail that had been dug in some 20 years previously. Guy had been there a while. Dad apparently tore the place apart. He'd had sight of the guy, but lost him in the end. The police came and took statements from my parents and had a look in the woods, but didn't find anything. They figured he wouldn't be back anytime soon. We never saw him again, and I always sleep with my windows covered. This is going to be long, as it is a long story that takes place over several years. I'm 23 years old right now. When I met the subject of this story, I was 15, so we're talking about 8 years. Get comfortable. Here comes an overdose of backstory before we get to the good parts. Let's go back to September of 2010. My third period class in high school is Algebra 2. This is where I met John. John was a sophomore, so only about a year older than me. At first glance, I thought he was quite cute. I was already in a relationship, my first ever one, but it was quite rocky and doomed to collapse. I had a close friend named Bethany who one day came up to me and told me that John was interested in me and wanted to get to know me. Bethany and John were acquaintances and thought at first she was trying to hook us up. My relationship with my first boyfriend ended only a couple of days before, and it seemed like the timing was on point. Anyway, the very next day, during algebra class, John came up to me and sat down beside me when we were told to work on an assignment. John introduced himself and wasted no time in asking if I wanted to hang out with him after school. It was a Friday, which meant that there was a high school football game after school in the evening. I assumed he wanted me to stay with him until then, or also during the game and then afterwards. I immediately agreed to, much to his surprise and Bethany's. They would later admit. I'm not sure why I was immediately able to say yes, but looking back, I was quite lonely and rather upset after my first breakup and wanted a boy in my life. I texted my mom, telling her that I was going to stay after school to work on a project and then stay for the football game with Bethany and her friends. My mom agreed and told me she'd pick me up afterwards. I spent the rest of my day rather anxious, and when the final bell rang, I met up with John near the band room. The following couple of hours were amazing. We worked on schoolwork together, talked about our interests, hobbies, and the works. I was surprised to find that we had quite a bit in common. We both liked the same books, movies, music, and we both loved to be outside. He did a lot of flirting that afternoon and evening as well, which, I must admit, was very flattering and gave me butterflies. We went outside on a walk around the area after we finished up our schoolwork. He was very poetic in the way he described and admired things like the trees, the air, the sky. I'd never heard a boy say these things before with such a poetic elegance, and it was beautiful. He was a beautiful boy, inside and out. He was also very intelligent and had a vocabulary that dwarfed even my own and the other smart kids in our school. He told very clever and funny jokes, and when we had a discussion, was easily able to intelligently explain and describe things in ways that I didn't even know were possible. Needless to say, I was falling for him. During the football game, we walked around and talked about our families and friends for the first time. John wasn't really open to talking about his family, and he told me he didn't have any real friends, only acquaintances. He told me that no one really liked him, not even his family. I felt bad for him. If there was anything that I learned that afternoon I spent with him, is that he was extremely likable. I could never imagine somebody not being able to like John. After the football game, he finally asked for my cell number and I gave it to him. Before finally parting ways, he gave me a hug and thanked me for spending the day with him before his mom finally arrived to pick him up. The next day, my parents invite John over. John wastes no time introducing himself, and after only about an hour, it seemed like we were all a family. John talked all about his hobbies, interests, and plans after high school. He seemed like a boy that really knew what he wanted out of life and had all the motivation and ambition to be successful. My parents fell for him as much as I did, and after he left had nothing but good things to say about John. I felt like this was the beginning of something very special. Before John left, he finally asked if I would be his girlfriend. My heart leaped at the opportunity. We exchanged a hug before he left and told me he'll text me when he gets home. John came up to me one day and asked if I was finally able to come over to his house for a change. My dad wanted to meet his family beforehand, but John was always reluctant to do so. And after I said I couldn't, he finally began to show a side of him I didn't even know existed. He expressed how much he disliked my dad. He expressed hostility towards him about how protective he is and whatnot. I simply explained that since I'm his only daughter, that's to be expected. John didn't like that though. He still insisted that my dad was a stuck-up prick who only wanted things done his way. I never saw John like this before and felt worried. Yet, he simply laughed it off, saying that he was probably just overreacting and that he apologized for saying what he said and that nothing was wrong. Of course, he said it in such a convincing way that I believed him, and we went along our day as usual. We were still together by the time summer came along. I spent that summer not talking to John after he explained he was going on a summer-long trip with his family, but he would be back sometime in August. It wasn't until 2 weeks before school started that John called me on a different phone number. I didn't question the number since I was just happy that I was speaking to him again. We talked for hours and caught up on things. He told me that he enjoyed his trip with his family and that things went well. I felt glad. He asked if I could come over, but once again, I said I couldn't. He didn't seem bothered by it, even happily saying that he'll stop by that weekend. For the next couple of months, John called me less often and kept to himself more. Finally, one day he broke up with me, telling me that he was probably going to kill himself and wanted to be alone until then. I cried myself to sleep that night. I tried calling John's house phone every day to try and speak with his mom or dad over the course of the next week, but no one ever answered. He was at school, but he never even batted an eyelash at me. The rest of the school year went by, and so did summer. John at this point became a senior and was still alive and attending school while I became a junior. John and I had been separated for a long time up to this point. Then one day, sometime in December, about a week before his birthday, this is how I remember, he came up to me and asked if I wanted to get back together. I hesitated at first, but agreed after thinking about it for a while. I didn't want John away from me any longer. I loved him. Gradually, his positive attitude and overall demeanor came back. He was back to the way he was before his depression. Before I knew it, things were great again. He came over a lot. We spoke on the phone every day. Things were perfect again. School year went on smoothly, and by the time summer came along, John had officially graduated. I became a senior. During the summer, John and I spent almost every day together, either in person or on the phone, talking about our futures. John at one point said he had a surprise waiting for me. 2 weeks later on, a beautiful Saturday night, John and I were lying down enjoying the starry sky. John told me to sit up and turn around until he said to look at him. He suddenly got down on his knee and pulled something out of his pocket. He told me to turn around. It was a ring. He then asked if I would marry him. My heart leaped and I felt tears in my eyes. I hugged him and said I would. Of course, being only 17 at the time and him 18, I would have to wait, but I didn't care. The love of my life had finally proposed to me. We shared a long kiss and an even longer hug before he departed for home. I spent my days at school thinking about John and what he was up to and looked forward to talking to him after school. Each day around the same time, John would text me asking how my day was, and after school he would call me. Life was good. That is, until about 5 months later. I unexpectedly got a call from John. Even thought he had told me that he was going to be away that day. He called me, upset. He told me that he was feeling depressed again. I asked him where he was, and he said he was at his uncle's house in his backyard. I didn't know where his uncle lived and stayed on the line as he cried. Suddenly, he told me that our engagement was off. My heart broke again. I cried hysterically as John cried as well. He told me that he was going to kill himself and that he loved me. Abruptly, the phone cut off. I cried for days on end and refused to go to school. I once again tried to contact him and his family, but to no avail. I was heartbroken. I was lost. I attempted several suicide times over the span of the next year and ended up hospitalized on a couple of occasions. Each time, the same reason, a suicide attempt or my parents caught me trying to do something. Not once did they ever try to contact John or his family, insisting that we leave them alone. I agreed. I didn't want to see him ever again after he had broken my heart. I eventually recovered and graduated high school. I began my life anew that summer and decided to put the past behind me and focus on the future. Now to the meat and bones. I hope you survived that overdose of context. Fast forward about a year after I graduated. This is when the letters began appearing in the mail. I'd received letters from somebody whose name and address on the envelope was always different who claimed to be in love with me. Every so often, maybe once a month, I would receive a letter from someone in the mail. My parents and I thought at first that it was someone other than John, given John had never tried to contact me since our engagement broke off, and that is his handwriting. When compared to notes he had written me before, were noticeably different. Each time I would receive a letter after the first one, I would immediately discard it, not wanting anything to do with whoever was writing them. I figured if I ignored the person, they would leave me alone. Boy, was I wrong. This continued for a little over a year. When the letters stopped arriving, nothing occurred up until one day. John had messaged me on Facebook asking how I was doing, but I didn't reply. I didn't want anything to do with him. I curiously looked at his profile, but it was all private and the photo of him was old. I had seen it during the time we were in high school, so it was definitely not a recent photo. Now, let's talk about when John began appearing around my area. It was the week following 4th of July in 2015. around the same time the letters ceased to show up in my mailbox. I was out on a walk with my dad and my niece when we all saw a car drive by us and stop just before the corner ahead of us. I didn't recognize the car, but I did recognize the person who got out of it. It was John. He hasn't changed one bit since I saw him last. He wasn't the driver, so there was someone with him. We watched as he casually walked to the backside of the car and inspected one of the back tires. At least, that was what it looked like. I noticed that he was looking towards us every couple of seconds. My dad and I watched on for about a minute as I noted it was John to my dad. My niece, confused, asked who John was. I said an old friend. My dad, a bit annoyed, decided that we should turn around and head home. I could hear the sound of the car drive up shortly after. My dad and I wondered why John was in the area, but we coughed it up to coincidence. Yet about a month later, my mom, dad, and I are outside doing yard work. My mom and I are tending to our backyard garden when we both hear my dad yelling, "What do you think you're doing?" My mom and I got up and walked towards the front yard and watched as my dad walked towards our driveway, pointing and cursing at someone out of our line of sight towards the road. We then heard the sound of a car driving off. My dad explained that somebody was hiding behind a tree off the side of our driveway and that he luckily spotted him as he tried to maneuver closer to our yard. At first we thought it was somebody scoping out the house, possibly a burglar. There were burglaries in our area before. I asked my dad if he recognized who it was, but he said he couldn't make out their face or any distinguishing characteristics. My dad did call the police and say that somebody was creeping around our house and possibly others. They sent out a squad car to patrol the area, but nothing came of that. Some time passes before I start receiving phone calls. I received a phone call late one evening, about 3 months after my dad chased a trespasser off of our property. I'd gotten home from work and was relaxing on the couch with my dog, watching a television show with my dad when I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. I picked it up, and this is how the call went. "Hello? Hello, Jacqueline." The man's voice was hushed and monotone. "Who is this?" "You know who." "No, I don't. I don't recognize your number." "Oh, that's too bad." At this point, my dad looked at me, confused. "Who are you?" "I want to see you one last time." "Wait, what? What did you say?" I looked down at my phone, confused and anxious. I looked at my dad, concerned. He asked for the number's area code. He didn't recognize it as one in our county or state for that matter. After Googling it, I found that it was an area code from Vermont. That's more than a state away from me. He asked me who it was. I said I didn't know. John's old cell phone number had the same area code as mine, but at this point, I knew that if John was the one harassing me, that he's not going to let it be known so easily, as he's practically the paradigm of intelligence. I received 3 more calls from that number over the span of 3 days, each in the evening hours. I eventually changed my number, but unfortunately, this didn't stop the calls. Over the span of about 4 months, I kept receiving calls from unknown numbers, some with different area codes than the other ones. I stopped answering after the 3rd time, and each time I went to listen to the voice messages left by the numbers, there was nothing but silence except for one which had the faint sound of a man talking, but I couldn't ever make out whose voice it was or what he was saying. I went to the police, but of course, there was nothing they could do. Of course, it didn't end. I was being constantly harassed by somebody who really wanted my attention. I at times thought it could have been John, but I didn't have any proof. The police told me that unless they had evidence to prove that he was harassing me, that they couldn't do anything. I always knew John as the paragon of cleverness, so catching him seemed hopeless. Fortunately, the phone calls eventually stopped. I was hoping whoever it was simply gave up. They didn't. Once again, some time passes. I was pulling into my driveway early one evening after returning home from work. As I got out of my car and went towards my front door, I noticed a piece of paper taped to the door. My parents were away for the day, so I knew no one was home. I never saw them leave a note behind before, which was odd. I walked up to the door and read the note. This is what it said. May not be 100% accurate, but it's the best that I can remember. I miss you dearly. Not a day goes by that I don't think of you. I dream about you a lot, think about you a lot, and I will not rest peacefully until I see you one last time in my presence. Signed, your secret admirer. My heart pounded as I read the paper. I ripped the paper to shreds and felt angry. I stormed inside and just about frightened my dog as I went upstairs to change out of my work outfit. I was angry for the first time since this all started with the letters. I've had enough. I'm sick of being harassed and crept out by this person. I called my mom and told her about the note. She was upset as well and told me to call the police. But what would they do? Nothing like before. If only this person broke into my house, then I would have something to make this a case out of. But the door was locked, as were the others, and there were no signs of entry. I felt hopelessly lost. Another year went by, and nothing major happened, apart from the occasional letter that started up again. About once every 2 months, I would receive one. Things finally began to die down. I'd thought that this nightmare was over. Of course, I was wrong. I was asleep one night when I woke to the sound of something knocking on my window. I got up in a trance-like state and walked to my bedroom window and opened the curtain. I saw nothing but trees. I lied back down, thinking I was imagining things. I then heard it again. I got up again and looked out the window. Nothing but trees. I went downstairs and found my dad, who was awake, and told him that something was knocking on my window. He went outside and walked around the house before coming back inside. He told me I was probably imagining it. I went back to sleep. This happened again the following night. This time, my dad wasn't awake and I had to wake him. He grabbed his shotgun, walked outside again, and once again saw nobody. He did, however, hear the sound of a car driving away from near our driveway and called the police, who came by and inspected our doors and windows for any tampering, but to no avail. I went back to sleep an hour or so later on one of our couches. A week goes by and nothing new happens. Once again, I thought it was all over, and it did finally end. The last thing that happened was back in late March of this year. My parents were sitting outside on our porch just before sunset while I was in the house playing with my niece when somebody drove by our house and stopped down the street. My parents, who were obviously well aware of what was going on with me, got up and made their way towards our front yard and peered down the street. They were able to see somebody get out of their car and walk up one of our neighbor's driveways. Our neighbor's driveway leads to the side of their house, which isn't fenced off, and you can easily walk from their driveway up to our backyard. My parents immediately came inside after my dad was finally able to recognize the person. It was John. My mom immediately called the police as we waited. My dad and mom had parked their cars in our almost never used garage that day, which probably explains why John was here now. Perhaps he thought I was the only one there. Sure enough, not too long afterwards, we see John walking up towards our backyard from our neighbor's backyard, quietly and slowly through the trees. My dad has his shotgun ready as my niece and myself go upstairs into my bedroom. At last, after all these years, he's finally going to get what he deserved. I sat quietly with my niece as I waited for the shit show to go down. I finally heard my dad yell out to John, telling him what he wants with us. I didn't hear John say a single word. By the time the police arrived, John had already vanished. But of course, now we knew who had been harassing and stalking me for the past several years. We finally decided, since we finally knew John was behind all of that we were going to file a restraining order against him. First, we filed the temporary order, then finally the final protection order. When I learned that John had to be there for the hearing, I felt afraid. Hopefully it will be the last time I saw John. To all of our surprise, he showed up and admitted everything at the hearing. Yet, he didn't show a single ounce of remorse and even smirked a few times during the hearing. I thought he took pride in his work and was eager to show himself off to us. It was bone-chilling. I must admit, I felt afraid seeing it. After all the years he spent harassing and stalking me, I still don't know what he's fully capable of. But at least now, he was legally bound to stay away, and I hope he holds up his end of the agreement. Of course, if he breaks the agreement, he'll be locked up, but I'm sure he's way too smart to even think about it. I just hope no other woman have been or ever will have to deal with him. As I sit here typing out this final paragraph, I can only imagine what he did that I wasn't aware of. I can only tell you what I know, what I don't know. Now that's a story in of itself that only he could tell. The first thing I must explain is that I lived in a place where there was a horrible fire in the late 1800s. Across from my house was a cemetery where all of the 800 people that perished in that fire were buried. My best friend had come over, and we were wanting to be alone, so we scampered up to our room. Shortly after that, we began to hear strange noises, like footsteps running up and down our spiral staircase. We yelled to my sister to stop bothering us, but she was nowhere in sight. We closed the door and backed up our trunks against it. While we sat there, a patterned knocking sound began on the wall. An eerie feeling came over us, and we no longer felt safe there. We rushed out of the door, and the room was filled with blue smoke. I never ventured up there alone again. It's strange that everything weird that ever happened in my bedroom, because there was another night I remember vividly. The night I saw a figure dressed in a red and blue checkered smock standing there. She smiled and waved, but then, when I went to touch her, she disappeared. Thank you for letting me share my experience. My friend would love you for it. It's important to be able to share these experiences. I don't think their ghosts were unfriendly, but they sure scared the living daylights out of me. Thanks for reading. This is a story that my mom told me about when my grandma worked as a maid for a rich family in England. The house she worked in was haunted, and some really weird things happened there. The most interesting was whenever someone cooked bread in the oven, it would come out smeared with blood. So after that happened several times, they blocked off the kitchen with a wall. Another neat thing happening occurred there when my grandma woke up in the middle of the night and heard the table being set. But then she found out that no one was up, and it was the middle of the night. To make things even more creepier, whenever she was cleaning the third floor and she knew that no one was up there with her, she got the strangest feeling she wasn't alone. One night, a thunderstorm was so loud it woke her up, yet her room was the only one that had the thunder that could be heard. Another night she woke up and her bed was rocking. In the morning, she asked the people who owned the house about it, and they said that her room was once the room of a young boy who became very sick, and every night his mother would rock him to sleep. Interesting story, and thank you for reading. The story I'm about to tell happened when I was about 15. For the last month or so, when we talked on the telephone, my friend had been telling me that during the middle of the night, when he was in bed, he could hear rocks bouncing off the roof, and this would go on for hours every single night. His parents also heard this and would go outside during the middle in the dark night to find nothing. Needless to say, it kept happening night after night. As time went by, the events got worse. Mr. Knock Knock, as they called him, started knocking on the door in the middle of the night and also during the day, which of course, when they would go to look, nobody was there. At this point, I didn't know if I believed him or not. One time, when I was talking to him on the telephone, I heard a really big boom, and he told me, "Oh my God, Mr. Knock Knock just knocked the door open." Of course, he went and looked, but as always, nobody was there. This got me excited. I said to him I want to stay over and hear Mr. Knock Knock. Now, I don't know if it was that night, but I did stay over. It was late in the afternoon, and we were in the kitchen, and I made the remark that I wanted to hear Mr. Knock Knock. Right after I said that, boom on the door. We went outside and found nothing. Finally, they had the police install cameras around the whole house, mostly in the trees, but they never recorded anything. They say that a man many years before hung himself in the shed. The same events went on for a period of time, then they just stopped. I think it was the man who hung himself many years ago. I know it was some spirit, but what it wanted, I don't know. I hope you all enjoyed the story though. Thanks for reading. Paranormal is a part of everyone's life, but not everyone noticed it. My first encounter was around 18 years ago, when I was 10. It was Christmas morning when I lost my father. It was a devastating loss for all of us, Since then, I don't want to celebrate Christmas. Anyway, let's get to the point. The day after the funeral, I was sitting in my room. I was bummed. I didn't want to accept the truth. And then it happened. I heard my father's voice, calling my name not once, not twice, but 3 times. I couldn't believe my ears, and I raced out of my room into the kitchen. My eyes were starting to water because I didn't see him. I started to cry and headed back into my room. Then I realized that it was very bright winter's day. I mean, it was freaking December 26th, and then I saw him. My dad was standing before me, smiling, surrounded by that light. I stared at him for what seemed to be hours. Then suddenly, light started to flicker, and I heard him talking directly to me. He said to me, "I'm sorry. Be good. I have to go now. Goodbye." And then he disappeared with the light. That was the last memory I had of him. The next experience was 4 years ago, when I was in my neighbor's house. My neighbor, let's call her Z, lived with her father, let's call him A, who by the way was a creepy guy. However, Z was gifted. She could see the future through cards. I was stunned when she told me things known only by me. I went there often times, but every time I took even the slightest look to A, my head started to hurt like hell. When I shared that to Z, she told me that I was sensitive. Every time, when I get a headache, I was in a way cleansing the negative energy. I shook it off because that couldn't be true. After the seance, you know the cards, she told me that I have a big hole in my heart, a hole full of pain and sorrow. She started to cry and told me that soon, very soon, I will lose someone very close to me, and I needed to be strong at that moment. After that, I stopped going there, and a week later, she died, leaving behind her awful father. I know it's a terrible thing to say, but he was evil. I can't explain how I know, I just do. 10 days after Z's death, A got ill and died. I know my stories aren't as exciting as the others, but they are true. Just letting you know that the person who I was supposed to lose was my mother, who died a year after Z and A. You may say it's a coincidence, but it's not. Every time I pass Z's house, I get the same headache, and I get the feeling that someone is watching me through the second floor windows where A lived. I'm 28 now, and I still get that feeling. About 20 years ago, when we lived in Navy housing on Oahu, Hawaii, my daughter and I experienced something that still haunts me. Honestly, I'm not sure what it was, and that I'm not sure if it was a ghost. At the time, we, my husband, our 2 daughters and I were living in Navy housing. I never believed in ghosts or the supernatural, and we didn't entertain such stories or thoughts in our home. It was a summer sunny day. My husband was at work, my oldest daughter was out surfing with her friend, and my youngest was at home with me. We had just finished lunch and decided to watch some TV. The TV room was just off the living room, dining room, and filled with windows and 2 doors, one to the kitchen and one to the backyard. There was a wall composed of 2 large sliding doors that separated the living and dining room from the TV room. Against that makeshift sliding door wall was a love seat that my daughter was sitting on. I was sitting on a chair opposite the love seat. The TV was to the side of us, on a low bookcase below a bank of windows. While sitting there watching TV, something shimmery, a staticky, sparkly, flashing sort of mass passed between us and the TV. It had entered from the living room into the TV room and then moved across the room and out the back door. Within seconds of seeing it, we turned to look at each other. She then jumped into my lap, and we sat hugging each other tightly for a bit before either of us could speak. I knew by her actions and the panic on her face, she had seen what I had. With fear in her voice, she asked me, "What was that?" I had no idea what it was, but I tried to reason it away. Staying as calm as I could, I told her it was probably the sun reflecting off a car passing the house. With a trembling, soft voice, almost a whisper. She replied, "But all the blinds are down." Not wanting to give in to the panic, I told her that the shades don't fit the window so tightly that light can't find its way in between window frame and shade. I then changed the subject to picking up my oldest daughter and going for shaved ice, a Hawaiian snow cone, but better. Other than telling family and friends for the next few weeks, we didn't and haven't talked about it since. We put it behind us. Fast forward 2 years later, my husband, reassigned back to Rhode Island, had moved back to the mainland to open our old home and get it ready while the girls and I were still in Hawaii. The girls still had a few months of school to finish, so he went ahead without us. The last few days on the island, I spent alone, cleaning our base housing. All our household belongings had been moved out the day before, and we were on our way back to Rhode Island. While I cleaned the house, readying it for inspection, my girls enjoyed their last few days with friends on the beach. I had cleaned the kitchen and laundry the day before and was now cleaning the bedrooms, bathrooms, and on into the living room and dining room. The whole house was floor-to-floor covering, which I had to sweep and mop spotless. I was mopping the living room and dining room area. The only thought in my mind was how warm it was now that the air conditioner was gone. Then, out of nowhere, appeared that same shimmering, sparkling, wild flashing mass. It crossed the room right in front of me. Being all alone and startled by what I was seeing, I packed up and left. I still hadn't mopped the TV room, nor finished the living or dining room. I didn't care. I was out of there. I grabbed my cleaning supplies, my purse, and locked the door. I left the mop and bucket with the curbside trash and got in the car and didn't look back. I have never ever seen anything like this before or after Hawaii. I've also since become more open-minded to ghosts. Once back in Rhode Island, I started watching the many supernatural and ghost hunting shows that had since started appearing on TV, and although I am open-minded now, I haven't seen any real proof. I say that because I'm still not sure what I saw in Hawaii. I still feel like there might have been a logical explanation. I'm still waiting to come across someone, somewhere, who has experienced the same thing. Someone who can tell me what it was that my daughter and I saw.
This happened earlier this year. I was still 13 at the time, along with my two other friends, Tyler and Jackson. We were all spending a night at Tyler's house that night, and before we went to his house, we hung out at our local skate park. We got annoyed with everyone at the skate park, so we three wanted to chill alone. So, we went down a block or two to a local park. It was about 7 or 8 o'clock, so it was pretty dark out. We were sitting on the swing sets, playing music, eating Cheetos, doing what teens do. All of a sudden, Jackson told Tyler to stop the song. He told us to shut up, as we were wondering why he did tell us to stop the music in the first place. He started walking towards the field of the park. Me and Tyler thought he was just messing with us. Then, he came running towards us, yelling at us to run. We grabbed our stuff. I hopped on my custom scooter and started hauling ass. We saw a girl running towards us. We ran down a couple neighborhoods, and after a couple of minutes running, we stopped and decided to go back for some dumb reason. We were sitting at benches. As it was close to the neighborhoods, we can just run and outrun the guy or whatever. We eventually forgot about it and we went back to playing music. Jackson and Tyler were facing their backs towards the playground, and I was sitting across from them. Looking out into the field, just out of curiosity, I saw someone. It looked like the girl from before, sitting in the field in a crisscross position with her hands on her face. I told them to look, and when they did, they saw her too. I said, let's just pretend she's not there and ignore her. We all looked back about 5 minutes later, just for the fuck of it. She was gone. About 5 minutes later, we got bored, so I came with the idea to start roasting each other. I wanted to go first, so I was going to roast Tyler. I was looking at his hair to think of something clever when I saw the girl behind a bush. My heart dropped as I saw her with blood-red eyes, and she was smiling at me. I yelled, "Run!" at the top of my lungs, and we grabbed our stuff and we started running. I hopped on my scooter once again, and as I was riding by the side, I heard her say, "Hello." We went back to the skate park. I'll never forget that night, as we still talk about it to this day.
Spirit in the Swamp. My encounter happened in early February of 1985 in a farming swamp area of extreme South Florida, outside Homestead, Florida. My father called it the East Glade. Some folks call it the Double Canals. It's a very flat area, fairly large area, 5 by 8 miles, where corn and potatoes are grown in the winter with a mix of willow, buttonwood, scrub oak, sawgrass, and cattail slough. It is a crisis crossed with small drainage ditches that we called jumpers because they were just wide enough to jump across. Some larger ditches and 2 large canals, hence double canals. The drainage ditches were dug for fill for the roads, which are set up in straight north-south, east-west grids, and they divide the area up into large plots of fields and swamp. It was late afternoon, and the temperature was cold for subtropical Florida, mid-50s, expected to drop to the low 40s that night. My buddy and I had been fishing the jumpers about smack in the middle of the glade, on the edge where the farms yielded to the swamp. About an hour and a half before sunset, I saw a figure approaching us from the swamp, about 3/4 a mile down the road we were fishing on. My friend was around a corner, so at the time I was alone near the car. I knew it was a person, but it was moving very slowly, and I didn't pay much mind and continued fishing, but kept an eye on it. After about a half hour, I could make out it was a woman. Then, as she got closer, I could tell she was barefoot, wearing only a long pink t-shirt with a teddy bear on it. The kind young girls sleep in, supposedly. When she finally got close enough to talk to me, I could see she had been out there a while. She had a slight build. Her mouse brown hair looked like it had been wet earlier in the day and not brushed very well. But her feet didn't appear very dirty. Her skin was slightly ashen, but not pale, and she wasn't blemished. She seemed fairly healthy, didn't seem lost or overly concerned about her situation. She asked me for a cigarette, of which I didn't have. When I told her I had none, she just looked at me blankly. I then asked her what in the hell she was doing there. She replied, "I've been swimming with the alligators." I asked her who left her out here. I figured she was a hooker or something. And she just said, "They left me here." I asked if, out of good nature, she would like a ride back to town when we were done fishing, and she said she had no place to go. I told her that I couldn't, in good conscience, leave her out there, and would give her a few bucks, and then drop her off at a convenience store. She just said, "I'll wait over there." She walked about 50 feet in front of my car, and she squatted down in the road and pulled the shirt over her knees and just kind of settled there. Now, this was getting kind of strange. So I went and found my buddy to tell him we had a crazy lost hooker we were going to take back to town. We spoke about it out of earshot of the girl and decided where we would drop her that would be the least likely place that anyone would see us dropping off a fallen flower at. He did ask if she propositioned me, which she had not. Then it seemed even stranger. He also said something to the effect that she might be trying to set us up to be rolled, which wasn't likely because I was wearing a rather large pistol. It's time to leave. She gets in the back of my 72, four-door Chevelle, and off we go. My buddy asked basically the same questions I did, and she gave me the same answers. Swimming with the alligators, not gators. Alligators, and that they left her out there. She also said she didn't have any more friends in town, that they were all gone. From that point, we just rode and were quiet. About a half a mile from the pavement in civilization, she blurts out, "I forgot my shoes." I told her she could get more shoes, but she reiterated that she had to have her shoes. I told her it's almost dark, and we're not going back for shoes. To which she replied, "Let me out. I must have my high heels." I wasn't going to argue with someone, and especially a crazy hooker, so I stopped and let her get out. She exited the car from the back passenger door, and at that moment, my buddy just looked at me and said, "She's a ghost." I told him he was nuts. She's a hooker, not a frickin' ghost. He said, "Not a spirit." As I was explaining him why his eyes were brown, I looked in the rear view mirrors, and she was gone. Turned around, no sign of her. The road we were on was white rock 50 feet wide and had flat, freshly planted farm fields on either side. Not a bush of a tree in sight, but it did have a jumper on either side. I still thought he was a loony, as she was. Then he turned around and put his hand on the seat where she had been for the last 20 minutes. It was cold as ice when I put my hand on it. He then said, "Did you notice she didn't smell like anything?" Then when he mentioned it, that she didn't, for someone who had spent a day in the South Florida swamp, she really had no odor at all. I didn't tell hardly anyone about it except my wife. Then one afternoon, while chatting with my father, I told him the story. With as serious a look as he could have told me, he had seen the same girl 50 years prior in the same area. When she approached, she asked the same question, "Do you have a cigarette?" Her attire was different. She was completely naked except a pair of high-heeled shoes. My father told me that she had been out there for a long, long time. This was sort of shocking to me that my father, elder in the church, had direct contact with a spirit and the same spirit that contacted me. Call bunk on it if you want, but this encounter made a believer out of me. Glowing Swamp Girl Perspective. My name is Cody. It all started about a year ago, when me and my best friend John went to Swine Creek Park in Ohio. There was an astronomy stargazing thing going on, and we avoided it. We were messing around with Nerf swords, and were fighting near the edge of a swampy area. It was dark outside at the time, so we couldn't even see much. It felt creepy being around there alone in the dark, but it was the only place that wasn't crowded. We took a break to talk, and caught a glimpse of something that caught our attention. There was a strange glowing figure of what looked like a young girl with long black hair in a wedding dress. It looked like she was walking slowly along the edges of the swamp water. As we stood there, frozen in fear and shocked to see what was happening, we started to hear a strange noise. It was almost sounding like a helicopter that was flying really down low. Of course, this could have been just crickets, I don't know, but I'm not sure. After watching it for what seemed like 3 minutes, we moved to the crowd as quickly as possible and begged John's mom to leave. This was our first paranormal encounter that we had seen. However, we thought nothing of it until we accepted the fact that whatever it was we saw could have very well been something paranormal. To go into more detail on what the glowing figure looked like, it was what looked like to be around the average height of a teenage girl. It had black hair, as I said, and was wearing what looked like a tattered wedding dress. The color of the glowing aura around it was like a greener color of a marshmallow or something. I'm sorry if this was undescriptive, but this happened a year ago and I'm new to this site. If you have any ideas of what this is, please comment. Thank you. The Everglades Ghost Boy. It was one of those days where you are really bored and have nothing to do. Then someone comes along and tells you what they have planned, and you are excited about knowing that you have something to do that day, and then later on something ruins it for you. It all started off early one morning when I was lying in bed watching my TV. My mother walked in and said that we were going to the Everglades to canoe, with my cousin and aunt coming alongside us. I quickly got out of bed and we all got ready to go. The drive was about an hour long, and when we got there was hardly anyone there, and it was very breezy and cold. We waited for about 15 minutes before my cousin and aunt arrived. Once we had gone to the office to arrange our canoeing plans, we headed outside to where the canoes were and started to get in. Me, my aunt, and my cousin got in one canoe and were pushed off the shore first, leaving my mom, dad, and sister behind, and us having to wait for them in the water. Once they were in the water, we started paddling. We had been paddling for about 15 minutes, enjoying the scenery and the time we were spending with each other as families do, when I spotted something move in the water. I looked down into the water and I saw a human figure swimming beneath us. The water was extremely shallow. The figure moved like it had all the room in the world, stretching its arms out wide, legs extended, and it was doing that even though there were walls of sand and mangrove trees everywhere, including the water. He seemed to be going through everything. I looked closely to see that it was a young boy. About 13 or 14 years of age, with beautiful blonde hair. I gasped for air very loudly too, so that my family would hear and show concern. The boy looked at me with dark red eyes and rings of black as well. I sensed evil and sadness and very much cruelty. On seeing me, the boy turned his head and swam away, deeper into the water, fading away. Once I had realized what had just happened, I noticed that my family was around me, worried. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" my mother yelled out to me. I nodded my head. Yeah, I'm just fine. I thought I just saw something in the water, and it scared me. It was nothing, though, I replied, unfortunately lying. My mom said, okay, and then we all headed on with our sightseeing. Not even 5 minutes had passed. Another thing happened. I was looking all around, enjoying the scenery, when I saw the boy again. I focused my eyes through the layers of thick mangrove trees to see the boy staring back at me with a very angry face, and this time with completely full bright red eyes. I thought I had passed through his territory and that me and my family needed to get out of there, and quickly. Our canoes went into an open area of the river, and I was still focused, looking at the boy. The wind started to pick up real fast, and it got real cold. My cousin was standing up at that moment, taking a video of the area with her video camera. My aunt was holding her legs from behind, but barely. As I continued staring at the boy, the wind got worse. The boat tipped a bit, and my cousin lost her balance and fell overboard into the water. I quickly looked away from the boy to look at my cousin just falling into the water. I stood and then reached out my arm to her. Then I remembered the boy and his evil look. I looked back at the place where I was just staring at him before, and to my amazement, he was gone. I panicked to reach for my cousin and pull her back on the boat. The boy was gone, and I feared he would do so, and maybe cause harm to my cousin, who was still in the water trying to reach me and my aunt's hands to get back on the boat. "Take my hand, take my hand, take my hand, get back on the boat," I yelled out to my cousin very loudly and quickly. She did as I said and swam to me quickly, reaching for my hand with both arms. I quickly pulled her back onto the boat, and she was fine. No damage done. Phew. I was worried the rest of the time in the water, and when we got back to the shore, I just happened to spot the boy again. He gave me an evil wink and rolled his eyes back, fading away. "Ouch! My back hurts," my cousin yelled out, and just after I finished looking at the boy, I lifted her shirt up, and to everyone's surprise, her whole back was a big black and blue bruise. Everywhere you looked on her back, she had a bruise. She basically looked like a ripened plum from her back. "I don't even remember getting hurt," she said to me. "Who knows?" I said back, fakingly, knowing that the boy had something to do with it. We left after that. I came back a few years later and asked one of the workers there of the history of the place after telling them of what I had experienced there. They told me that many years ago, a boy in his teens was playing around with his friends in the water where my family and me were canoeing. One of his friends placed a bet with him to see who could hold their breath the longest. The boy, who had died, was from a poor family and wanted to win the money desperately. After they completed, the friend who was competing against this boy noticed that his partner was floating when he touched him to tell him that he had won. He quickly grabbed him and pulled him out of the water, then went to go get help. The kid had wanted the money so bad that he drowned and did not even mean to. He lost his life that day, and no one could bring him back to life. When his parents found out, they both committed suicide for losing their only son. I understood the story. When I was walking out of the Everglades Center building, I looked down at the area at where the canoes were, and there was the boy, standing there, looking at me with a sorrowful face, and this time light blue eyes. I smiled at him, and then waved goodbye to him. I looked back, and he had sort of a smile on his face. At that moment, I felt like he knew I understood, and was just glad. I used to live in a pre-Civil War house. I was in the midst of a dream one night, and I was dreaming my dog was pulling on my clothes and pinching my skin with her teeth. I awoke to this being a reality. My dog was waking me up, and she was covered in a gray ash. She was literally gray instead of her natural yellow cover. My room was full of floating gray olive green smoke. My walls were covered in soot. My lungs were full of smoke and residue. I was coughing up black tar, and my tongue was sticking to the roof of my mouth. One more second of sleep, I would have been dead. I rushed my dog and I out of the bedroom and collapsed on the floor coughing. When I was done coughing out a tar-like resin and could somewhat breathe again, I re-entered my room to see smoke still hovering. From the first floor halfway up to the ceiling, it was clear. From there up to the ceiling, it was thick, still smoke. After opening up the windows, I noticed, on the little plastic table along my bedside, there was a pile of ashes. This was very strange, considering the night before, I wanted a cigarette, but had no form of fire. I didn't feel like walking upstairs, so I decided to just put the smoke off until tomorrow. There were no matches or lighters in my room. I know for a fact because I looked very hard before sleeping. When I went to touch the first pile of ashes, it disintegrated by the touch of my finger. It was my wallet. The strange thing is, all of the plastic cards like credit cards, license, etc. were cooked along the edges, like they were baked. The only untouched parts of the cards were dime-sized circle in the center of the cards. I also noticed my wallet was not the only thing that was a disintegrated pile of ashes. The PlayStation CDs and my cell phone were also a pile of ashes. I thought maybe the battery of the cell phone exploded, but the burn on the tabletop was easily distributed. The burns, or should I say baked in marks on the table, were only under the burnt items. The rest of the surrounding table was untouched and in perfect condition. If it were a normal fire, there would have been wrapping and disfigurement of the flammable, thin, cheap plastic table. I also noticed I had a glass candle holder with no candle in it that was literally melted into the table. The glass was actually melted down. I had oily black suit on my legs and above my head on the wall. This was weird because the suit on me was different than the suit on my dog in the walls. It was very oily like shoe polish. Picture the McDonald's logo. Now vertically cut that M in half. This was the shape of the very dark suit over my head on the wall, like it came out of me or something. The rest of the walls were like light gray ash, like the ash covering my life-saving dog. I actually had a sunburn on the side of my arm and face from the hot fire that occurred. To this day, I still wonder how the suit got under my covers on my body, why it was oily, and why the suit over my head on the wall was darker than the rest of the walls. The fire department came over my house and could not find a source of fire. None at all. They were quite baffled. The firemen told me to buy my dog a bone because she saved my life, and that the fire was more of a flash of heat at least 1200 degrees in order to melt the glass candle holder on my table. He said he hates to use the words, but it is considered spontaneous combustion. It did remind me of a photo I once saw that had a body in it that spontaneously combusted. The body was cooked, but not all of the body was burned. The bed was only burned under the body. Like my table in my room, it was only burned under the cooked items. I put the table outside because 1, it creeped me out, and 2, because I grew tired of the volunteers at the fire department, along with the paid firemen kept calling me and kept wanting me to see the table where the fire took place. Before the fire, my roommate and I saw an orb floating over the cornfield across the street. Who knows if it was related? After the fire, I slept for 2 days. I woke up to find my life go downhill for the next 7 years. Did the fire have something to do with it? Who knows? Did the orbs have something to do with the fire? Who knows? After the fire, I was actually followed by several orbs in different neighborhoods, about 30 miles away. I was with my friend who witnessed the orbs with me. Is it all related? In Ventura, California, there's a home and a business that are haunted. The lady's name, who owns the house, is Linda Vander Wyck. I don't think that she's married. Anyway, in this house, there's a bad spirit and a protective good spirit. The bad spirit tries to burn the house down every now and then, and the good spirit wakes up Linda and leads her to the fire. On the night that Linda moved in, she was asleep and alone when she felt a tap on her shoulder. Linda said that she wasn't scared when she awoke. She walked into the other room, and there was a fire going on in her fireplace. Linda hadn't built a fire that night. Then she said that she had words come into her head that she should be very careful about fire in this house. Another time, Linda saw smoke and ran to her front door where the smoke was coming from and found 2 trash cans melted to the ground. The evil ghost had tried several times to burn the house down. Luckily, Linda escapes. One fire started in her room right out of thin air, and another fire started in the attic that almost trapped Linda in the house. Authorities investigating this fire said that it was started on purpose. Linda then took in roommates. Several of her roommates have felt the evilness of the one ghost and the goodness of the second ghost. The evil ghost has been seen by Linda's roommate as a charred man standing at her bedroom door at the same time each night, and the good ghost has been seen sitting in an old chair, a lady in her early 40s, wearing a dress and looking kind and friendly. Even though the charred man keeps trying to burn the house down, Linda won't leave because she feels that the house is charmed because of the good ghost. Linda wanted to find out about the ghost, so she did some investigating throughout the house. Her roommate said that she was terrified to go into the basement because of the scary feelings that it gave her. Linda went down to the basement to see what she could find. Finally, she pulled open a cupboard. Behind it was the beams holding up the rest of the house. They had been in a fire long ago, but the house is still standing. Okay, anyway, Linda called in a ghost hunter who had special equipment, and he was testing the place for energy readings or something of that sort when he tested this old chair. His machine about shorted out because the reading was so strong. This is the same chair that Linda and her roommates have seen the old good lady spirit sitting in. Linda thinks that the charred man is the evil ghost that was burned in the house fire. The ghost hunter says that something pretty awful must have happened, and that this event has left a scar on the house, trapping the charred man here on Earth. Linda found out who the original owner was, and that he also owned a flower shop downtown Ventura. The flower shop has a new owner, and has changed it to the Phantom bookstore. This place is haunted too. He said that books fly from their shelves, and that the doors open and close by themselves. Linda thinks that the owner of both the house and the old flower shop is her charred ghost, but she has no idea who the lady in the early 40s is, who protects her from the charred man. All the same, Linda won't leave because she feels that she is well protected. Creepy, no doubt. I just think that seeing a charred man at my bedroom door every night would be just as scary as seeing Freddy Krueger from the movie Nightmare on Elm Street. I must go now. Happy ghost hunting. And thank you for reading. This is yet another story told to me by my stepfather. It's a little creepy, so hold on to your computer mouse for comfort. About 20 years ago, my stepfather and two of his friends were renting an old house in Liverpool, NS, Canada. It was rather remote, I guess, and the locals had tagged it as being haunted. The men scoffed at such notions and moved right in, forgetting all the silly warnings. A month went by with no real problems. Everything seemed calm and serene. One night, however, my stepfather and one of his friends decided to stay up late, light a fire in the fireplace, and sip some cold ones. They assumed the fire was out after dumping soot on it, so they went to bed. At 3 a.m., my stepfather felt something cold, almost icy on his shoulder. He bolted awake, and he could smell something smoldering. What could it be? He just asked himself. Oh no, it must be the fireplace. He raced downstairs and got there just a split second before a big log was just about to roll onto the floor, flames shooting everywhere which way. He ran over and flipped the log back into the fireplace with a pair of tongs. Yet another 2 months went by without any other happenings. One of the guys had a bright idea of using an iron to iron their clothes for work the next morning. Well, they did not unplug the iron. The wiring malfunctioned and blew a fuse. My stepfather was again woken up to the touch of icy fingers on his shoulder and was able to fix the problem without much difficulty. 2 weeks later, he was shuffling through some old things in the ancient attic when he found a diary. It seemed that 50 years before, there had been a girl living in the house named Teresa who had kept a diary when she was about 14. She had watched her drunken father drive over a nearby cliff with his horse and buggy one night, and she went hysterical. Her mother, a cold, unloving creature, decided her daughter was insane and locked her up in the attic, only giving her bread and water once a day. My stepfather turned the diary into a local museum where they told him Teresa had eventually died in her room, where the attic was now. It didn't take long for these grown men to pack their bags and leave. Thanks for reading. So about 2 or 3 years ago, around 2003-ish, I moved into my apartment with my dad. It's a triplex sort of thing, with walls and floors like drums. At first, I looked at it and I loved it. It looked all new, with hardwood floors, freshly painted walls and everything. I never considered why it looked so new, but I found out after we had moved in that there was a crazy old man that used to live in the basement, and he used to set fires like once a month. One time, he got caught in the fire and he burned to death. I actually forgot about it for the first year or so, which is strange for me because I'm a ghost fanatic. Anyway, a few times, all the fire alarms in the building would go off all at once, but seeing as I forgot about the old man, I just thought somebody was cooking or something. One night, my dad was on the computer, and I was lying awake in my bed, and all the fire alarms in the front and back stairwells went off. I knew nobody else was awake, because there was a brick wall on either side of the house, and if any lights are turned on, it shines on the wall, and you can see where the lights are on. So, me and my dad go to the front and back, and as soon as we open the doors to the stairwells, they all turn off. And this would happen once every few months for about 8 months, and it stopped after that. And another thing, I always hear sort of a whistle, a click noise at 11:18 or 19 p.m. in my room, or in the hall outside my room. Anyway, that's my story. It isn't especially shocking or anything, but whatever. Thanks for reading. I've had no paranormal experiences whatsoever, but I'm telling my mother's true story. Please keep in mind that this is a really short story, so I apologize in advance, but I hope you enjoy it. One night, my dad lit up a cedar log for our wood stove and set it on the top to let it burn a little before putting it in. Well, him and my mom were really tired because we were out and about all day and somehow forgot about the wood. They went to bed, and mom and dad went to bed. Well, my mom was in that state where she was half asleep and half awake when she felt someone nudge her on the back. She turned around, thinking it was me or my sisters. She saw no one and got out of bed to see what was the matter. She saw the log in flames that we set up to 5 feet high and quickly called my dad. But before she could do that, she noticed an apparition by the fire. The apparition was unusual because it looked very fiery, just like the fireplace itself. It was strange, but it was a calming presence. The presence was so warm, and she felt like she could hug it because it was so positive and full of light. Then, the apparition just faded away, with a smile on its face. That's what she noticed. They put out the fire, and Mom told Dad the story. At first, she told my dad that she was shocked by the mere presence of the figure, but she felt a sereneness to it that she couldn't explain. She felt happy around its presence, and that it would make her happy. I'm thinking it was her guardian angel, because they saved us all, and I'm so thankful that the fireman came and saved us. I bet you never heard of the fiery angel. Well, I guess you do now. Thanks for reading. The story I'm about to tell is something that recently happened to myself and my roommate. About a month and a half ago, my friend Margot, now my roommate, had a fire at her apartment. Her apartment building was built around the turn of the century and is situated on the 3rd floor over a barber shop and a wig shop. The halls aren't very well lit, and the landlord at some point painted all the walls a butterscotch brown. For the color of the walls, we can only reason that there must have been a sale somewhere on this paint. I had only been to her apartment after the fire to help her clean up anything that was salvageable. The fire started mysteriously enough in the kitchen near the hot water heater. She noticed smoke and immediately ran around the building to notify the other tenants of the fire. She was dubbed a hero by her local paper. Not realizing how quickly the fire would spread, she took her 2 cats and stuck them into a closet, but when she returned the fire was too out of control to get back in. Despite firefighters' efforts, both cats died during the blaze. It was a devastating loss to her. She moved in with me not long after, and we started making trips over to the burnout apartment to start the cleanup process. I never liked the stairway leading up to her floor. Her apartment was the only one on that floor, and the stairs just gave me the creeps. I was supposed to meet her over there one Saturday afternoon and got tied up doing some other things. When I finally got over there later on in the afternoon, she had already left. It was deathly still and quiet. You could have heard a pin drop despite the fact that several other families inhabited the building. I thought I heard a noise like a door slam on one of the floors below me. I leaned over the balcony to listen and didn't hear any sounds at all. I got kinda spooked and decided to leave. My legs felt like jelly as I descended the staircase. Once Margot got home, I told her about the feeling on the staircase. She said that she felt it on numerous occasions as well. We never felt anything threatening, just a strange feeling. This past Saturday, we got up early to make one of my last many trips to the old apartment. Around 10 a.m., her friend Kathleen came up to join us in the help of labeling boxes and cleaning soot off of different things. Kathleen lived downstairs from Margot, and they had been friends for many years. We were out working in the hallway when it kept feeling like maybe I was coming down with something. I would bend down to do something and lose my balance. Then there were these cold spots. I thought I was getting a fever, but then it would pass. My stomach started to feel a little bit queasy. It was getting towards noontime, and we decided to break for lunch. I associated how I was feeling with the fact that I had 2 cups of coffee on an empty stomach. Once I had some fresh air and some food in my stomach, I started to feel a lot better. The 3 of us continued back to finish the work we still had left in the apartment. Once I reached the 3rd staircase, the feeling came back over me like a wave. I started to feel disoriented and dizzy. I tried to put it aside and went along my business of packing things up in the back room with Kathleen. Margot was doing something in the kitchen when I heard her call for me. I went into the burnout kitchen. That is where the fire started, and the room is completely black with soot. The large windows are now boarded up, and the old stove is now turned over. As I walked into the room, I could feel the goosebumps rising on my arms, and all the hair stand up on the back of my neck. Chills ran down my body, and I felt another wave of dizziness and nausea came over me. She asked if I could feel it. I started backing out of the room, and then I broke out into tears. It was like standing in the presence of something very big and very pissed off. I didn't see anything, but it was like the air in the room was alive, or dead. I told her I couldn't stay there. Kathleen was still working in the back room and didn't hear what was going on. Margot and I raced down the stairs into the parking lot behind the building. As soon as I stepped outside, I lost my lunch. She was coughing and gagging. She said loudly, "What the hell was that?" I said I didn't know, but it didn't seem to be too happy. She had lived there for 10 years and never had experienced anything like that. In all my 30 years, I don't think I've ever felt something so strongly negative. The last time I sensed a presence like that was in a restaurant ladies' room at an old building in San Jose, California about a year ago. Then there was the time before that, when I was about 14, but that's another story for another day. I was worried about Kathleen, who was still alone and unaware of what had just happened. Margot didn't want to scare her where she still lived in the building. She also said that she didn't think Kathleen was in tune with that kind of stuff. I sat down on the pavement and caught my breath. Margot lit a cigarette. We were both shaking and felt very strange. It took a long time to feel normal. It was like this negative presence had permeated over our beings, and it slowly faded after a while. We decided to go back in, grab a few boxes we were taking with us, and get the hell out of there. I took a deep breath, and then I blessed myself before entering the apartment. We got to the top of the staircase, and I knew it was still there. I said out loud that whatever it was still there. Margot said she could still feel it. I walked into what used to be our bedroom and avoided looking into the kitchen at all costs. I grabbed some boxes and headed down the stairs. She said she would meet me downstairs. Kathleen still had no clue to what was going on. I tried to get myself down the dimly lit staircase, all the while fighting the feeling that I was going to be pushed from behind. A few minutes later, a very nervous Margot and an unaware Kathleen came down to the stairs with stuff to load into the car. The 3 of us went back to my house, and we didn't bring it up again until the next day. On Sunday morning, Margot and I sat at the kitchen table drinking our coffee and discussing what happened the day before. I asked her when she noticed that something was odd. She said she had been in the kitchen trying up a trash bag when she just got a weird feeling that she was being watched. She said there was a shadow against the boarded up window. She said it was very large and dark. She thought maybe it was her own shadow until she moved and the shadow didn't. That's when she called me into the room. After I'd left the building, she told me she was tossing boxes over the balcony right outside her apartment door when she felt someone shove her as she leaned over the railing. She got the rest of her things, locked up, and got the hell out. Right after that, we both came down with what I can only describe as the flu, complete with fever and other flu-like symptoms. It has since faded. My roommate is over at the apartment as I type this. Luckily, her dad is with her, and she brought over a couple of religious items for protection, including holy water. On Monday morning, I awoke from a restless night of sleep. I was dreaming about her apartment. I was up above and looking down at her as she was throwing boxes over the side of the balcony. It was very vivid, although not very scary. Then I was helping a very old lady down the stairs. It was all strange. Margot got up not long after and said she had a terrible night's sleep. She also had been dreaming about the apartment but wouldn't elaborate on what she dreamt. What or why it happened, we don't know. The town she lived in is very rich in history. And from what I've heard, the Historical Society has taken very good records of the town over the years. We're thinking of doing research on the building, and I'll post anything we find. One thing we did find strange was that Kathleen's grandmother has lived in the apartment building for 50 years, and when asked about the past of the building, she refuses to talk about it. Anyway, that's my story. Strange but true. What I want to know is if any other readers have experienced this feeling of being sick or being disoriented after a run-in with the paranormal. When I started crying after leaving the kitchen, I felt extremely sad, and I had been in a pretty good mood all morning. Any ideas? Thanks again for reading.
Hey guys, so it's Phantom here. If you guys could please leave a like for this channel, leave it a subscribe if you're new because we have new content on the way. If you could please share the video and give it a comment. Let me know which story you liked. I want to hear from you in the comment section. My voice is, on the mend again, but I think I'm better already. Don't want to risk anything, but love you guys. See you in the next video.